Welcome back to the Hannibal Retrospective. But before we get to the episode, I have to rectify a few things first, because in episode 1, I made an error. Katz is also the first new character addition to this version of the story. Jimmy Price and Brian Zeller give their 2 cents. And despite Price and Zeller being supporting characters not in the book, in actuality, Jimmy Price, Brian Zeller, and Beverly Katz all appear in the Red Dragon novel, so that is my mistake. Although in the novel, they are extremely small roles and don't have anywhere near the kind of personality or chemistry that the show version has. So maybe that's why it didn't quite register for me. But my mistake. The other mistake. Zeller mentions that deer suffocate their prey with their antlers. I make it sound like deer are carnivorous hunters. But for once, this is not my mistake alone, because the show makes the same error.
Hold on, excuse me. Deer and elk pin their prey.
Prey is more likely the wrong word to use here. It's more accurate to say that deer suffocate attackers as a defense with their antlers, rather than making it sound like deer seek prey to kill and eat, although it is documented that deer occasionally eat meat. One last thing as well. If I don't mention something or don't go into enough detail about something, please don't presume that I have forgotten about it. There are a lot of episodes to get through, and it makes no sense to discuss, interpret, or reveal part of the plot before the show is anywhere near close to getting to it. So I know it might be frustrating, but please understand I will get to it. So, with all that out of the way, let's get to the episode, shall we? Episode 3 is called Potage, which if you're not familiar is a type of stew or thick soup. So, with aperitif, we had an appetizer in episode 1, we had amuse-bouche, a small taste of things to come with episode 2, and now with episode 3, they might be saying the plot thickens significantly with Potage. We begin this episode with Abigail and her murderer father hunting deer, and we learn quite a bit about how Garrett Jacob Hobbs' mind worked, as after Abigail shoots the deer, Hobbs tells her that none of the deer will go to waste to honour it. Abigail doesn't seem to like the idea of cutting up the deer, especially not eating it afterwards, and Hobbs reiterates what Will knew of him.
Eating her is honouring her. Otherwise, it's just murder.
It's interesting, though, that he stipulates without honouring the animal, it's murder, which makes me think that the hunting didn't lead to the killing. Garrett Jacob Hobbs always had an urge to kill, but when he mixed it with his hunting ideology, that's what gave him the justification to go through with it. And in case you can't see the obvious parallel of Abigail helping her father to kill and go along with him butchering said animal, the show clears up any ambiguity when the deer becomes one of his victims, causing Abigail to wake up violently from her coma. After the opening titles, Will greets Bloom at his home, and when she tells him that Abigail is awake, Will wants to immediately go see her, but Bloom insists on some coffee first. Inside with coffee, Will's phone is ringing off the hook. Crawford wants Will to go see Abigail, but Bloom wants him to wait, with an interesting detail about Bloom.
You rattle, Jack. He respects you far too much to yell at you, no matter how much he wants to.
And I take advantage of that.
It seems innocent, but it does illustrate how everyone is manipulating someone, even the seemingly innocent Bloom. It emphasizes how we should be questioning everyone's motivations, and in fact, the only person who may not be manipulating anyone is Will, who's stuck in the middle of all of it. Will tells Bloom that Abigail doesn't have anyone, and Bloom quite bluntly says she's not another of his stray dogs to take home. No matter how much Will disagrees, the fact is, the first person to speak with Abigail shouldn't be him or Lecter. Thankfully, Bloom volunteers. Will and Lecter thinks Abigail is innocent and should be cared for. Crawford thinks she's a suspect and should be investigated. Bloom is like a less severe combo of both those standpoints. She's still not ruling out suspicion, but she also has a duty of care for her patient. Bloom goes to the hospital to speak with Abigail and doesn't start things off great.
Are you a doctor?
Not medicine. I'm a psychiatrist.
A psychiatrist is a medical doctor. They just happen to specialize in the mind.
What do you specialize in?
Among other things, family trauma.
And there's no such specialty. Mainly because family trauma as a description is so vague it's ultimately and clinically useless. I am just hoping that Bloom is breaking it down for Abigail so it's easy for her to understand, because the alternative is Bloom doesn't understand her own profession. Anyway, Bloom and Abigail talk, and even now there's something ever so slightly off with Abigail. Firstly, she says she told the nurses she didn't remember the incident when she did, which seems minor, but it is manipulative. And when she's told about her parents both being dead, she's quick to want to sell the family home, being surprisingly practical and detached from the ordeal. And we can see the suspicion is slowly creeping into Bloom's face. She doesn't know why yet, but it's there. Back at the FBI, Bloom relays to Crawford her findings. He desperately wants to solve the case and find whatever remains of the victims. And if I may reduce this scene to basic imagery here, Bloom is the angel and Hannibal is the devil on Crawford's shoulders. Hannibal tells him that Abigail is innocent and should be trusted. Bloom tells Jack that she's hiding something and to investigate further. And even when Bloom tells of Abigail's penchant for manipulation and how she showed enough emotion only to prove she had them, clear psychopathic tendencies, which I'm sure Hannibal is familiar with, Crawford still wants Will to speak with Abigail. Which certainly plays into Hannibal's machinations, and it might seem strange that Crawford is going against Bloom considering she shares his suspicions, but Crawford's issue is his need to solve the case, catch the killer at the detriment of everything else. So of course, Hannibal will use that to his advantage. Will is currently in the middle of a lecture when Hannibal, Crawford and Bloom show up, and after recapping the Hobbs case, Will talks about the copycat killing, and it sounds like Will has gotten Hannibal down to a T, with his preference for Freddie Lowndes articles, considering himself better than the average killer, like Hobbs, and ultimately Hannibal's goal with killing.
Elevate them to art.
And it's so interesting to watch Mikkelsen's face in this scene. I've previously talked about how Mads Mikkelsen is able to illustrate complex ideas with minute facial expressions. But in this scene, he's able to do that while maintaining a complete poker face the entire time. However, about that scene, there is one small plot hole.
Aaron Jacob Hobbs murdered his wife and attempted to do the same to his daughter. He received an untraceable call.
Why would a call from a normal phone line through a normal phone be completely untraceable? Of course it would have to be, otherwise the series would be over pretty quickly, wouldn't it? Fortunately though, Hannibal's plot armor isn't used that often, so let's just chalk this one up to episode 1 being a pilot and not fully thought out yet. But on the subject of the call, as soon as Will makes his theory known,
The as yet unidentified caller was our copycat killer.
It says a lot that Hannibal can't contain his poker face at being seen by Will. Back with Abigail, Freddie is already working an angle trying to gain Abigail's trust by helping her story be heard. Abigail asks how her father was caught, and Freddie, in her most tactless way, says that Will caught him because he's just as insane as Hobbs was, which is low even for her. Will and Hannibal insist she leaves as she does everything she can to make Abigail not trust Will snatching her business card away before getting her out of the room. Once Freddie leaves, Will and Lecter talk with Abigail, and it's important to note Will taking his glasses off to talk to her. We are physically seeing him let down his guard around her. Only time will tell if that's a mistake. Sadly for Will, the first thing Abigail says she remembers is him killing her father. All three go for a walk, and she talks about the incident feeling responsible for her father's actions, and she worries about nightmares. They both promise to help her, and Will opens up some more, telling her he worries about nightmares too. And there's an interesting moment when Abigail asks about killing.
So killing somebody, even if you have to do it, it feels that bad.
There's a brief shot of Lecter reacting to what she just said, which to me implies he can see that she's laying the groundwork for later and manipulating Will here. Outside the facility, Will, Lecter and Freddy have a confrontation. Will replacing his barrier, of course, and Freddy apologising insincerely. She's full of arrogance, even trying to wrangle her way into Abigail's life by claiming she can repair the earlier damage made, but then threatens to make it worse. Will then says something he really shouldn't have.
It's not very smart to piss off a guy who thinks about killing people for a living.
Back with Crawford, he's quick to chastise Will for saying that, due to it ending up in a Freddie Lowndes article. But he also chastises Lecter for letting him say it. Lecter saying he trusts Will with his own words. I do think Lecter has almost two opposed ideas. What's good for Will, and what's good for Lecter. Because he does trust Will, and wants Will to say those kinds of things, so he can be more like Lecter and embrace that other side of himself. But of course, if those things make him look a bit unhinged, that's the side that works for Lecter as well. Abigail wants to go home, but Bloom disagrees because it's a bad idea. Lecter agrees it might be bad, but he also thinks revisiting the trauma will be helpful too. It's hard to say how much of what Lecter says is manipulation. After all, the best manipulator mixes the truth with fiction. But it's enough to convince Crawford to let it happen, siding with Lecter, because, as he says, it suits his agenda, possibly Lecter working that angle to his advantage. Elsewhere in a cafe, Freddie Lowndes meets with someone who's glad Garrett Jacob Hobbs is dead. However, he reveals that his sister was the victim of the copycat killer. And despite acting like she wants to help Abigail, Freddie continues her self-serving pot stirring, telling him Abigail is awake. They take Abigail home, and at the Hobbs residence, someone has graffitied cannibals on the building. I wonder how Lecter feels about that, because it's quite prophetic, considering Lecter will eventually be dubbed Hannibal the Cannibal. Abigail sees where her mother died and says she expected to see an outline on the ground.
They only do that if you're still alive. Taken to the hospital before they finish the crime scene.
Which is completely and hilariously wrong. So, according to Will, if somebody is at a crime scene, wounded but still alive, a cop is going to be like, hang on 1 second, and done! Now take them in the ambulance. It's a lot to ask for a victim to remain still while wounded. And if they don't draw around the person while they're still there, then that's forensically useless, isn't it? I don't know what's worse, that stupid idea, or the simple fact is, police don't do outlines anymore. Because think about it, if you draw on or mark the scene, you're just contaminating the place, aren't you? And to further emphasise how Will is so wrong, they see where Abigail was laying on the floor, and there's no outline. So even the show completely contradicts what Will just said. Anyway, back to the plot. Abigail asks Will what it was like to empathise with her father, but Will shifts the topic to the man on the phone, telling Abigail she may have spoken to the copycat.
I'd never heard it before.
Now, is it just me? But does Abigail unintentionally look at Lecter when she says that? And with Lecter's reaction?
Is there anybody new in your...
I think he noticed that too. And while going through her possessions, Abigail wonders if she could have her father's psychosis. And for some reason, Bloom then mentions folie à deux, which is a psychiatric syndrome in which a delusional belief is transmitted from one person to another. So thanks for that, Bloom. Read between the bloody lines. Abigail hopes she hasn't got her father's psychosis. That's why she asks. And Bloom just says, yeah, it's completely possible. But of course the main reason she brought it up was so the show could raise questions about Will again, as he relives Hobbs telling him to see. They tell Abigail they're also there to find evidence, and she's oddly excited to reenact the incident, casting Will as her father, and quite brazenly...
And you be the man on the phone.
Yeah, there was nothing unintentional about that. Clearly Abigail is showing Lecter she knows he was the one on the phone. A fact I dare say Hannibal won't take lightly, because right now Abigail has power over him, so he'll need to do something drastic to become the dominant one again. Abigail tells them that there won't be any remains of the victims because her father used everything to honour them, but she agrees to go to the cabin and help them look. To cut things short though, one of Abigail's friends shows up to talk with her as they walk in the garden. She tells Abigail that everyone is talking about the incident and how everyone thinks Abigail is involved. But not her though, no. It's then the guy Freddy was talking to earlier appears to basically accuse Abigail of all the things she's being suspected of. I'm gonna assume Freddy informed him of the case details. He soon runs off after getting a rock to the head, though the mother of Abigail's friend arrives to tell her to get home, Hannibal taking note of her language.
Can you stop being such a bitch?
And while looking for the guy, Lecter makes sure and hides the rock that hit him in the head. A plan is forming for Lecter, and it's quite fortuitous that opportunities keep presenting themselves to him. He'll be sure to take full advantage. Later that evening, Will has another dream of the feathered stag, and he sees himself in Hobbs' place killing Abigail. And I'm not going to speculate on what the feathered stag might mean just yet, but it's certainly filling in the details. And waking up, Will is still having an issue with profuse sweating, and that will start to become more relevant. Later at the cabin, they take Abigail through the place, and she starts to remember what all the parts of the deer were used for, and it's only now she realises that she was more than likely fed human meat. That took her quite a while to figure out. The big sign saying cannibals on the front of her house might have been a clue to put two and two together, surely. After that revelation, Abigail believes that if her father had killed her, no one else would have died, which is highly doubtful to say the least. But before that can be explored, blood drips on Abigail from above. And upstairs they discover the body of Abigail's friend impaled on antlers, just like the previous Minnesota Shrike victims. Lecter works quick when he's on the back foot. Also, the targeting of Abigail's friend almost seems like a punishment for Abigail from Lecter. Crawford is soon shown to the crime scene, making clear his suspicions of Abigail, giving her a long glare, and upstairs Will and Lecter talk over the body, and Lecter does a bit of showing off when the copycat is mentioned.
But Garrett Jacob Hobbs didn't kill Cassie Boyle.
I know.
Lecter, a lot of the time, is elevated by the show and his fans above the usual psychopath. But these little quips he gets in every now and again do betray the fact that he has a very similar kind of mentality, the need to show off. Crawford is even more suspicious of Abigail now another girl is dead, but Will notices there's some blood evidence on the girl's teeth, the blood evidence from the stone Lecter hid. Crawford wants to know how Will could have gotten the copycat so wrong. He said he wouldn't kill this way again. And then some honesty from Lecter.
I think he was provoked.
And you be the man on the phone.
But Lecter then implicates Nicholas in the murder of his sister and Abigail's friend. Crawford is now starting to think Will is compromised by Abigail and her manipulation. Lecter even says that Abigail might be the target of a killer. All of these little details form a picture so convincing that even Will thinks he might want to kill Abigail. We saw that with his dream. Lecter is feeding this instability and making sure Crawford knows so that Will becomes less trusted. It's very clever and very subtle. And a lot of this stuff won't become fully clear until all the way into season 3. Abigail is taken home once again to leave for good, and there's already a media circus over the recent murder, including the girl's mother, and it's quite perverse of Lecter to be the one to hold the mother of the girl he killed. I don't know what's worse, her finding out or her never knowing. Freddy soon appears once again to stick her oar in the situation, claiming to want to tell Abigail's story again. Lecter asks her about Nicholas Boyle, making it pretty clear that he knows Freddy tipped him off. And inside, Abigail isn't doing so well, and then things get worse when she realises what the cushion is, using her father's knife to cut it open, finding it stuffed with human hair, making her freak out even more. Which does surprise me, honestly. Investigators know what Hobbs did to his victims, so if they're searching for evidence, wouldn't they check things like cushions? Maybe not, but it's just weird that something so obvious was missed. And mid-freakout, Nicholas Boyle appears to try and appeal his innocence to Abigail, but she might not be in the right mindset to talk, and it doesn't help him slamming Abigail into a wall, so Abigail stabs him in what seems like self-defense. Bloom and Lecter return to the house, and Abigail, still in shock and covered in blood, walks up the stairs, being seen by Lecter first, who gives us a brief glimpse of his viciousness. Lecter made sure to not do any permanent damage though. Lecter immediately takes charge, seeing Nicholas Boyle's body, telling Abigail that it wasn't self-defense, but murder. This is an interesting moment for Lecter because he has to both convince Abigail that she committed murder, but also convince her to hide it, because if she gets caught, so does he. They have to become partners in crime, keeping each other's secret. But of course, there's no equality. Lecter's the one in control. Afterwards, once a body has been hidden, I presume, Bloom recovers in an ambulance, not remembering anything of her attack, fortunately for Lecter. And Crawford confirms Lecter's ruse has worked, linking the blood on Abigail's hands with the blood in the latest victim's mouth. So for now, Lecter continues to steer the investigation away. And later that evening, Abigail goes to Lecter's office after climbing over the wall of the hospital, and they discuss what was already established. Abigail knows Lecter called the house, repeating that they think he's a serial killer, like her father was. Lecter confirming how he thinks of himself.
I'm nothing like your dad.
And the episode ends with them both agreeing to keep each other's secret, and the last shot of Abigail's face showing her slowly realizing that she got played, and is now trapped in the situation. So that was episode 3, Potage, and it's quite the downgrade from the first 2 episodes. It's still a watchable episode, but the fact that there is no food displayed is indicative of the fact that they were far too concerned with cramming as much plot into the episode as possible. As I said at the start of the video, the plot thickened quite a bit. I just wish that it wasn't to the detriment of the episode. It's all plot, none of the usual style that the show is famous for. Also, I was quite surprised at the number of silly mistakes too. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to give a massive thank you to all my Patreon donators. Their support really does help a lot. And if you would like to contribute to the channel and gain access to the Deusdaecon Reviews Discord server, the link is in the description below. And if you would like to get more content aside from the reviews, please consider checking out the Twitch channel, where I stream live 5 days a week, 9 PM GMT, with subjects ranging from Let's Plays, discussions, and movie watch-along nights. So join me live if you wish to see stunning moments of strategy just like this one. You, trade with me. Oh! That was a mistake! That was a mistake! Holy shit! What? Fuck! The link is in the description, so I'll hopefully see you there. And on YouTube, I'll see you next time.